the most important thing that we teach in the negotiation classroom is to ask why not.
Hey everybody, this is Jeremy Tears from Tutor Collegiate Strategies, and you're about to check out the latest episode of the Mission of Mission podcast, a show that's designed to help higher ed become better recruiters, communicators, marketers, and managers. Each week I'll introduce you to an industry leader or difference maker who will share helpful advice, tips, and strategies that will help you grow professionally and personally. Mission of Mission is part of the Enrollify podcast network. I'm excited to share my latest candid conversation, so let's get started. Hey everybody, it's Jeremy Tears, and this is episode 32 of the Mission Admissions podcast. I'm excited to be joined today by Jeanne Brett, who is a distinguished professor with the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University. Jeanne has taught for more than 40 years all over the world, and she's an expert when it comes to the topics of managing workplace conflict, negotiation strategy, and multicultural teams, each of which we're going to talk about today. Welcome to the show, Jeanne.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm excited to unpack each of these with you, so let's get right into it. Can you start, Jeanne, by defining what it means to be part of a multicultural team for us?
I can try, because that team may be multicultural for a variety of different reasons. Team members may have different values, that is, what's more and what's less important to them. They may have different norms, what they think is appropriate behavior in a situation, different beliefs, what they expect and what they predict that other people will do. Now, the reason people have different values, norms, beliefs is that they grew up with them. And these are important to them because this is how they interact normally with a group that they identify with socially. So it means that when you have multicultural teammates, or even teammates that you might not even have thought about as multicultural, but they're behaving in a way that you view as different or annoying or offensive, it may not be anything about their intending to offend you or annoy you. They're just acting as they learn to act in their own normal cultural environment. So let me tell you a story, if I may, to illustrate this. So when I was doing the multicultural team study, my research has been so rewarding over the years because I've had the opportunity to interview managers in all over the world and in all kinds of situations. And this was a manager, a member of a multicultural team. And this manager told me about a teammate. And it really struck me, the story, because it was exactly the same experience I had had with a teammate with whom I was doing research. And for this teammate, every other word that came out of this person's mouth was a swear word. And when that happened to me, I was like, whoa, what's going on here? And then I realized this person really didn't have any filter, didn't realize that this was or could be offensive. And I kind of got used to it, thinking I can handle this easier than this person can stop. And the manager who I was interviewing said they intervened multiple times. And this was just so much of the way this person spoke that they had trouble stopping. And ultimately, sometimes with multicultural team members, when they can't adjust and other team members are so offended, this team member had to leave.
If we know then, Jeanne, that so many teams today, regardless of the industry, higher ed obviously being included, team members have different values and different norms. Talk to us then more about your research and just some of those categories. I know there was 4 of them as I was reading things that really create barriers then to a team success who is multicultural. And the 2 I really would like you to unpack. Let's start first with this concept of direct versus indirect communication and why that creates challenges.
Jeremy, you start with the hardest one to understand because indirect communication is just not intuitive to many Westerners. I was trying to explain it to my MBA class once and was failing dramatically. And one of my East Asian women students came to my rescue and she said, "Professor, let me help." And she said, if a friend in China asked me if I liked her new dress and I didn't like it, I would never tell her that. Instead, I might say, "Love the shoes." And she would know that since I didn't mention the dress, I didn't really like it. The challenge that indirect communication imposes on team members is you need to understand the context of the information in order to interpret it. And in the example my student gave, her friend, who was also Chinese, absolutely understood that she didn't like the dress. But in a Western culture, the friend might say, "Okay, so you like the shoes, but what about the dress?" and keep pushing on that directness. And every culture, there's a, a distribution. So we can be quite indirect in Western culture too when we don't want to hurt somebody's feelings when we think about it. It's just our normative approach is to be direct. So the challenge here then is if you're communicating directly, the direct communicator can be very offensive to the indirect communicator who's used to not being told to their face about what's going on or what they should be doing. And then the opposite is that if you're communicating indirectly, the direct communicator may not understand you. So people pass in the night in terms of communication. Um, the key here, I think, is to um, figure out that the other party's communicating indirectly.
Well, and I think to your point, educating, anybody listening to this yourself on just the different cultures and backgrounds of your colleagues, or if you're in a position of leadership, has never been more important. Another factor that you identified in your research, Jeanne, that really caught my attention and I think would be helpful for the audience is this idea of conflicting norms when it comes to the way we make decisions. So can you explain a little bit more about what that means and just how that, maybe give an example of how that tends to play itself out?
Sure. So, a good example of conflicting norms comes out of this kind of directness, indirectness again. So, let me tell you another story. This was an exec ed student. His company had a new joint venture, again with a Chinese company. And he said, after class, he came up to me and he said, "I think I have a new interpretation for something that's been going on. And I wondered if I can tell you about it." I said, "Sure, I like stories." And this is what he explained. He said, "We've got a joint venture and we have a male Chinese manager with us for 6 months. And he's working on a marketing project. And his peer American manager on this project is an American woman. And every time the Chinese manager disagrees with the American woman, the Chinese manager comes to the boss, which was the student who was talking to me. He said, he's constantly coming to me with these points of differences. He said, the points or differences are really valuable and important, but I expect them to work through them themselves. And he said, what you've told me is that in a Chinese context, the norms are if you don't agree with your peer, the issue gets pushed up the hierarchy. It's the boss's job to decide which of the perspectives the company is going to go with. And that way, see these cultural differences, they work really well in their own context. He said that way it gets pushed up, then the two peer managers, there's no bad feelings between them. They didn't fight it out. The boss made the decision and they follow what the boss decided. But of course, in a Western context, that's inappropriate. You're supposed to be able to work through differences with your peer managers. So then we had a long discussion about what do we do. And I said, I think you sit down with the Chinese manager and the American manager, and you talk about these different norms so that each of them understands the norms from the other person's culture. And with that understanding, see what they can work out themselves. And I'll bet you'll see less of these problems being pushed up to you.
So then it gets me thinking, if I'm a leader and I want to try to be proactive and try to prevent any sort of, cultural or even gender or age differences on my team from causing tension between staff members, what are some strategies or just processes that you would recommend implementing that would help with that?
I think it's easiest when you're starting out, when you're the new manager, you're pulling a new team together. It's harder. So let's start with that. The strategy I like best, and of course it's Western, and that's probably, I'm Western, so I kind of like it for that reason, probably. But the strategy is to be a role model for respecting differences, but also a role model for addressing them. So let me give you another story because I think the stories illustrate these points. Um, this manager was working in IT. He was now pretty high level IT manager, but he was talking about when he first started out, he was coding right out of college. And he said, I got assigned to a team, and the leader of the team hardly spoke English, he said. He did, but he had an accent. He said, I couldn't understand anything he said, and neither could anybody else. And he said, but the team leader very quickly brought us all together and said, look, I have an accent in English. I know it. It's terrible. I've tried to get rid of it, and I can't. But we need to understand each other. So if you don't understand me, we have to work. Maybe we have to plot it out on paper. Maybe we have to plot it out on the whiteboard, but we have to understand each other. So if you don't understand me, you have to stop me and work with me until we have complete understanding. So what I like about that story is that it really set a norm for the team. If a team member feels comfortable confronting the leader over a lack of understanding without pushback from the leader, and this leader didn't push back, this leader said, let's work on it, then team members can confront each other also. This manager said, I have used this throughout my career as I start with new teams, is learning to recognize that there are differences that we can't really change. And the issue is how do we work with them and respect them? And then the team usually follows in. And in terms of accents, what's really interesting about accents is that the longer you listen to an accent, the more comfortable you are with it. So the team got more used to that leader's accent.
Hey guys, it's Zach here, founder of Enrollify, with some huge news. So I am ecstatic to announce that Element 451, the AI-powered all-in-one CRM platform for higher education, has acquired Enrollify. Back in 2019, I approached Tony Frega, the CEO of DD Agency, with an idea. Tony's a good friend of mine, and so I said, dude, let's build a next-generation media hub for higher ed marketers and admissions professionals. As a lover of media, I was just so impressed by how the attention landscape was changing and how brands like The Skim and The Hustle and Morning Brew began to eat up market share from more traditional publications. And I thought there was an opportunity to build something similar, obviously a lot smaller, but similar in the niche but oh so important arena of higher education marketing. Tony and the leadership at DD were gracious enough to allow me the time and the space to ideate on this half-baked idea and then launch Enrollify's first ever content asset, which was, you guessed it, the Enrollify podcast. Since then, Enrollify has grown into one of the most trusted resources for candid higher education marketing content in the industry, and we've welcomed industry giants like Terry Flannery, Jamie Hunt, Allison Tercio, Eddie Francis, Dave Kibbolds, and Jeremy Tiers, just to name a few, into our network of creators. As we started thinking about the next chapter of Enrollify's life, it became clear that it was time for Enrollify to scale. I'm pretty good at building things, but scaling things is a skill I'm still working on. When thinking about who could take Enrollify to the next level, I felt as if artists Mallory and the leadership at Element 451 were uniquely qualified to inherit the brand. Element has actually been a part of Enrollify's story since the very beginning. They were our second podcast sponsor ever. They have invested in almost every experiment that we've ever run. They ship product faster than any other ed tech company I've ever met. And perhaps most importantly, artists and the leadership team invest seriously in thought leadership and education. Building Enrollify has been the most rewarding experience of my professional career to date, and I couldn't be happier to collaborate with the Element team as we seek to take Enrollify to the next level. And don't worry, I'm not going anywhere just yet. You are not through with my lovely voice just yet. But if you've found any value in Enrollify over your years of tuning into our content or watching our videos, it would mean a lot if you could share a kind word or two about how Enrollify has helped inspire you or helped teach you something new about marketing on social media. It would really, really, really mean a lot to the whole Enrollify and Element team, but to me personally as well. So if you've gotten any value of any of the content that we've ever produced, share a quick story or a quick thought about us on social. That would be wonderful. Well, thanks so much for being here, guys, and get ready. We've got so much in store that I can't wait to share with you all soon. But for now, back to the podcast.
I want to shift gears and talk a little bit about negotiation, Jeanne. This is something that I think really will help a ton of people listen to this because you've been doing research on, negotiation, especially in different cultural backgrounds for over 30 years. I think when I think of negotiation right away, one of the biggest things that's most important is trust, but would love your point of view. So can you talk about the role of trust and just give us your thoughts on how that plays into this concept of when you're in a negotiation with someone?
Sure. So when I started out studying negotiation, we didn't focus on trust all that much. And as I moved my research into a global context, it suddenly became clear to me, or as usual, one of my graduate students said, "Professor, I want to study trust," and then came in with data that said, you should have been paying a lot more attention to trust. The reason that it wasn't obvious in the first place is I was studying negotiation in Western culture. And what we've learned is that in Western cultures, first of all, are relative to other cultures of the world, very high trust. People assume the other party's trustworthy. And then, it's not like you assume and then play stupid about it, but you assume the other party's trustworthy, do a little testing to confirm that assumption, and move right into the work relationship. But I didn't think that that was going to be true around the world after I had started doing more global research. And so Tyree Mitchell and I did a research study. We did some of it right before COVID, and then we were really fortunate. We went back and interviewed a bunch of our same managers during COVID. And we have a book called Searching for Trust in the Global Environment. So I mentioned the West. It's like, I trust you. If you're open, you're confirming that trust, we just jump right into the business. East Asia is also actually a high trust culture, but it's with a twist, because trust in East Asia is based on something called cultural tightness looseness. This is a concept that Stanford professor Michelle Gelfand has written a lot about, and she also has a book on it. A tight culture is one with strong social norms and monitoring and sanctioning of deviations from those norms. So what it means in the context of trust is that people's reputations provide a lot of information. So I look at people's reputations, the school they went to, and particularly what other third parties say about them. Now, when we move to Latin America and the Middle East, South Asia, these are cultures that, if you look at the World Values Survey, much lower trust in general than the West or East Asia. And in common managers in the Middle East, South Asia, in Latin America, they look for relationships first. If the personal relationship is there, then they'll move to working on the business relationship. In the West, it's the complete flip. If we have a business relationship, then we assume the personal relationship will follow. So we learned a lot when we interviewed for Searching for Trust in a Global Environment. That trust is terribly important in building new relationships. It pretty much means the same thing around the world. It means you're a new business partner and you're not going to take advantage of me. But what you need to know about that partner to know whether they're going to take advantage of you or not is very different. The Westerners look for openness. The Latin Americans look for rapport. The Middle Easterners, the South Asians are looking for that indicator of respect. And the East Asians are looking at reputation and will take a risk on reputation. It was great fun doing all those interviews and going back to talking to people.
Trust is going to be important regardless of who you're having, that negotiation with, whether it's talking to a 17-year-old and you work in admissions, or it's having a conversation with a parent who happens to come from a different background than yours. I think everybody wants you, to listen and be open, but to your point, right? Respect for differences is so important, but trust, I would argue, probably isn't the only thing that makes somebody a good negotiator, Jeanne. So just walk us through, or anything you're willing to share in terms of other things that are very important in terms of like the best negotiators. Here are other traits that they happen to possess. What do they do effectively?
Well, the best negotiators both create a lot of value and they claim it. So claiming value is how much value I take home for myself. And claiming value is all about setting very high goals, which keep people motivated. So if you're negotiating and you have an alternative and you get an offer that's better than your alternative, the tendency is to relax. I've got this deal. But if you have a high goal, you keep pushing for that high goal. And that's very important for finding actually a bigger pie, for the creating value. So high goals is the first thing for claiming value, but for creating value, you need two things. You need to know what kind of information you're looking for. And that kind of information is not so much about what people want, but why they want it. It's something we call interests. What is motivating people? What is underlying the positions that they're taking? And what is more and what's less important to people. So in negotiation, you're not going to get 100% of everything you want. You've got to make decisions about priorities. So the first thing that you need to know to create value is, what are my interests? What are my priorities? But what are the other party's interests and priorities? The second thing is, you need to know how to go about getting that information. And you need to be able to get that information when trust is high and people are direct. And that's kind of easy because you can ask questions and usually get some answers as long as you're willing to reciprocate. But you also need to know how to get that information when trust is low or when parties are much more indirect in how they communicate. And that's much more difficult. Negotiators are firm on what's most important to them, and they make small concessions on things that are of lower priority. So if you're thinking, again, come back to this idea of indirect communications and the importance of context. The idea here is, I have to look at the big picture and see what they're holding firm on and what they're making small concessions on in order to infer what's more and what's less important to them. Good negotiators create a lot of value because they set high goals, and they claim it because they know what information they're going after and they know how to get it, whether trust is high or trust is low.
Yeah, so much I would argue is understanding how to get people to share, to your point, thoughts, feelings, what they value, and then understanding what you can provide them with, back to the value part of it. I am curious, we're talking about negotiation, and I know that you're currently doing research on how negotiation kind of meshes there with AI. So anything that's really surprised you so far, Jeanne, with that research?
Jeremy, the AI research has been so much fun. Um, we last summer we prompted the open AI bot to be the angry negotiator, and then we took um, that prompt and that software to the meeting of the International Association for Conflict Management, which is negotiation and conflict management professors from all over the world. And we said, negotiate with our bot and tell us what you think. And we had prompted the bot to be angry, to not make concessions until the bot's expertise was respected. And we got great feedback from our peer professors who said it was very realistic and that they had a lot of fun doing it. And um, so it's a whole new way of teaching students, of helping them to prepare for negotiation. So the platform that I work with is called idecisiongames.com, and IDG for short. IDG has set up with professors who are monitoring and developing these prompts, ways for helping negotiation students prepare for negotiation. So they do a prep, and then the bot comes back and says, yeah, did you think about this? What about that? You haven't really thought through that. Are you sure those are your priorities? What about thinking more about the other party? So the bot comes back and gives them feedback to prepare, which means I don't have to grade any prep documents anymore. We can do the bot like the angry negotiator. We can have them negotiate with a bot. And then with the angry negotiator, you have the transcript of both what the bot said and what the human negotiator said. And you can prompt a bot to read the transcript against your criteria for concepts that they're supposed to be using to make the bot less angry and talk about the issues and how well they did using those concepts. So the bot will give the individual student feedback. It's a whole new way of teaching students. It gives students in negotiation individualized feedback that we have never been able to give them. And there's something called negotiateup.com.
I think you're going to see, to your point, AI continue to just be another way for people to ultimately go through scenario type training to be able to better prepare them for then a real life situation like
Mm-hmm.
that. Anything else that we should be mindful of or thinking about, just so that, those conversations can end in a very positive way where the other person feels like, okay, that was beneficial for me, or that was helpful for me?
Yeah. I think Jeremy, the most important thing that we teach in the negotiation classroom is to ask why not. Sometimes you have to ask it in a very gentle way, but you're trying to understand why not. So sometimes you can ask directly, sometimes you can paraphrase and say, so are you telling me this? Are you telling me that? But what you need to understand is why they're behaving the way they are, why they're not behaving the way you think they should. And with that, you hope that you can respect, and with respect, you can often go a long way toward integrating, creating value. There's so much value in differences. Differences aren't bad per se. What's important about differences is to acknowledge them, respect them, and see how you can work with them. Can you work with them 100% of the time? No. Can you work with them a lot more than what we probably do? Absolutely.
And if you're directly asking why or why not, I would argue to the things we spoke about earlier, the more trust you've built with somebody, the easier, right, Jeanne? It's going to be
Absolutely.
obviously for them to say, all right, I'll share exactly with you why or why not.
Yep.
So trust again is just so important. Jeanne, the last thing I do with every podcast guest is something I call fun rapid fire. And so I'm just going to give you 4 or 5 different questions and I want some quick feedback from you, okay?
Okay.
All right. Favorite country you've traveled to?
Well, you can tell I've traveled and had the opportunity to teach in a lot of different countries, and I can't pick one over the other. I have these wonderful memories of my hosts, my colleagues, my students, and the experiences we've had together. So, not picking a country.
All right. I'll let you off on that one. What's the most cherished item there in your office?
It's not my it's not in my office. It's out the window. It's my garden, and it's the 11th century walls that protect my garden in my house in France.
Wow. Okay. What's one thing then that people are generally surprised to find out about you?
Well, since I live part of time in France, they think I speak French really well, which I don't.
Book that you've read multiple times, Jeanne, that like anybody listening looking for a good read, you would recommend?
Well, the book I recommend to my classes all the time is Fisher, Urey, and Patton Getting to Yes. And the reason I do that is my classes I do mostly exec ed now. So they're filled with managers who have partners and children. And I want them to take those interest-based negotiation skills home. We've worked hard on them in the classroom. I want them to let their partners and their teenagers and their young adult children in on the secret of interest-based negotiation. So I say, every class I've had this fall, I say, these are your Christmas presents, especially for teenagers. Teenagers get it when they read Getting to Yes. So I recommend that book, and it's in lots and lots of different languages.
And the last one, what's your favorite thing to do there in the Chicago area?
Oh, well, I really enjoy all the Chicago Architecture Center's tours, the boat tour, the walking tours, all of the tours. They're just great. Chicago has fantastic architecture. It's great fun to hear the stories behind it.
Jeanne, thank you so much for being on today and just sharing all your different thoughts and just what your research has shown. If anybody wants to get in touch with you after listening to this, Jeanne, what's the best way for them to do that?
My email is all over the web. So I have a Northwestern email, and I'm happy to respond to that.
Excellent. Thank you again for your time today, Jeanne.
Thank you, Jeremy, for asking me. It's been a pleasure.
Hey, all, Zach here from Enrollify. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Mission Admissions with Jeremy Tiers. If you like this episode, do us a huge favor and hit that follow and subscribe button below. Furthermore, if you've got just 2 minutes to spare, we would greatly appreciate you leaving a rating and a review of this show on Apple Podcasts. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, admissions, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks that are all designed to empower you to become a better higher ed professional. But Enrollify is far more than just a podcast network. Enrollify is where higher ed comes to learn new marketing skills, discover new products and services, and find their next job. We're a growing learning community of 4,000 members, and we'd love to welcome you into the fold. You can access our free blog articles, newsletters, e-courses, and more, or purchase our master course on how to market a university with Terry Flannery at enrollify.org. We look forward to meeting you soon and welcoming you into the community. Again, you can subscribe for free at enrollify.org.